I was saying that, as you may know, Buenos Aires was one of the main centers of Yiddish culture and theater during the 20th century. However, we practically cannot find works that have fully studied the Jewish theater of Buenos Aires, and in Argentinian theater history, its contribution is hardly mentioned. So, surprisingly, this is a research topic that has been neglected by scholars. That's one of the main reasons why I chose it as my dissertation topic. So today, we're going to speak about the history of the Jewish theater in Buenos Aires, mainly between the 30s and the 60s, but the official beginning of the Jewish theater in Argentina is established in 1901. This is the first play that was performed in Yiddish in Buenos Aires, is El Tartamudo. There are any Spanish speakers in the audience? Great. So I will go backwards between Spanish and English. So this is Zwei Kunilemel, the Two Kunilemel, the play by Abraham Goldfaden, and it was performed in Doria Theater. This is the first play. But the great Jewish theater flourish started in the 30s, when Buenos Aires was established as a Jewish theatrical city of international relevance. We have a lot of reasons that could explain why this theater boom happened. First of all, during the interwar period, a large population of Yiddish-speaking Jews settled in Buenos Aires, escaping from European hard living conditions and anti-Semitism. As a result, a rich Yiddish cultural life began to grow, and the city became an attractive destination for intellectuals and artists. On the other hand, as you know, by the 30s, the audience of the Yiddish theater here in the US was already declining, so the actors and actresses decided to go touring to other countries where the Jewish communities were still eager to see theater in Yiddish, as it was the case of Argentina. Plus, the southern hemisphere had a big advantage. It benefited from the seasons opposition, right? When here it was summer, there it was winter, and the opposite, right? So this allowed that during the summer break, the actors could come to work in Argentina without the need of completely leaving their own companies. That way, they were able to do two winter seasons, one in the US, one in South America, one based here in New York, and the other one based in Buenos Aires, from where they also traveled to other Argentinian cities, such as Rosario, Santa Fe, Córdoba, and also to other Latin American cities, such as Montevideo in Uruguay, Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, Santiago, Chile, among others. I have one I can show you. This is Bulov tour. He went to Montevideo, the Solís Theater, Teatro Solís in Montevideo, and this is the Cadima Theater in Moisesville. Moisesville was one of the most important Jewish colonies in Argentina. They also toured to Basavilbaso, where my family was from. Do you know this name, Moisesville, Basavilbaso? It sounds familiar? Well, the Jewish colonies in Argentina, they also went there. And the 30s were also the time when the Jewish theater in Argentina stopped being associated with white slavery. Even though by the 20s, the members of the Spimigdal was the name of the prostitution organization, were already expelled from most of the Jewish community institutions. Until 1926, the theater remained an activity they could participate in. Therefore, the presence of pimps and sex workers in the playhouses led to a fixed idea that identified Jewish theater with an immoral and indecent place, not suitable for families or intellectuals. Many historians have suggested that some Jewish theater companies even were supported by money that came from prostitution. This is a really polemic and complicated topic in Argentinian Jewish history, and it's not my main area of expertise. Toba Markenson, probably many of you know her, she's currently doing her PhD thesis about the links between the Yiddish theater and the prostitution network, so I'm looking forward to reading her thoughts about this topic. But what I think is that even if we can know for sure how big was the influence of the Spi Migdal on the theaters, it was true that these ideas discredit the Jewish theater for a long time and drove a big part of the audience away. This situation started coming to an end in 1926, when the Jewish theater officially forbade entry to the members of the organization. And in 1930, the Spi Migdal was finally dissolved, so the Jewish theater was released from all suspicion. This is why all these reasons are the explanation why in the 30s the golden age of the Jewish theater in Buenos Aires began. So between the 30s and the 50s, we can find 4 theaters that presented plays in Yiddish on a regular basis. We have the Soleil and the Excelsior in El Barrio Abasto. We have the Mitre in Villa Crespo. And until 1940, the Teatro Ombú, that is which the AMIA is today. You know the AMIA. Where the AMIA is today, it used to be a Yiddish theater. In addition to the theaters, some cafes also presented Jewish vaudevilles numbers, such as El Cristal and El Internacional, creating a wide Yiddish theater scene in Buenos Aires. The shows were held from Tuesday to Sunday, even with 2 or 3 performances on the same day during the weekends, and the season normally lasted from April to November. And the theaters were always full. Even some families came from the Jewish colonies or from other cities, especially only to attend to the Jewish theater. And it was a family activity in which all its members participated. The presence of small children in the theaters is recalled by Mori Schwartz in his letters. In one of his letters, he says, I'm gonna read his quote, he says, "In no country in the world did I see so many young people in Yiddish theater as in Buenos Aires. Mothers would take their infants into the playhouses where they became avid enthusiasts in diapers." I like this quote. And it's true, all the people I interview remember this same story. They said to me like they remember running around in Yiddish theaters when they were kids. So it's true. So we're gonna start speaking about Teatro Empresarial and star system. I was struggling to see how I could translate this concept, Teatro Empresarial, that's why I wrote it in Spanish. I believe commercial theater would be the best way to say it, but I feel like something is lost in translation. Because Teatro Empresarial is meant to be the opposite to Teatro Independiente, independent theater. El Teatro Independiente, the independent theater in Buenos Aires, was a political movement. They wanted to be independent of the impresarios, independent of the need for profit, because they believed that the search for economic success compromised their artistic values and political beliefs. So when we speak about Teatro Empresarial, we are talking about a theater system run by impresarios who wanted to make a profit out of it. But from now on, I will use the expression commercial theater to refer to the Teatro Empresarial. So here we have Salomon Stramer. I'm going to translate this quote, but for the Spanish speaker, is the original one in Spanish. Como empresarios, quisimos tener 2 cosas al mismo tiempo: responsabilidad en los business y buen repertorio, un aporte a la cultura. It's something like, as empresarios, we wanted to have 2 things at the same time: responsibility in the business and good repertoire, a contribution to the culture. This quote synthesized the difficulties that the commercial Yiddish theater faced in Argentina, the contradiction between the search for profitability and the desire to stage plays of artistic value. As you could imagine, the commercial theater in Argentina was organized by a star system. You can see in this the one. There you have Bulov, Schwartz, and Ben-Ami. So the impresarios brought stars from abroad to lead their companies and then completed the cast with local actors and actresses. To bring foreign stars that already had great reputation, like these ones, was a way to guarantee the success of the season. So thanks to the star system, many renowned artists arrived in Argentina and were considered outstanding visits, even outside the Jewish theater community. This happened especially in the case of Ben-Ami, Mori Schwartz, and Bulov, because their repertoire and their acting style were completely different from the type of plays that were presented in the Argentinian theater, Jewish and non-Jewish also. It was operettas, melodramas, light comedies. So that's different from the repertoire they brought to Argentina. And it's interesting how if you look into Argentinian newspapers, you will be surprised by the way the theater reviewers write about these Jewish actors. In most cases, the critics don't even mention that they were performing in Yiddish. They only talk about their acting skill, their abilities, and refer to them as figures of universal theater, regardless of the language they were using on a stage. I believe that Jewish impresarios were completely aware of that, as you can see in this poster. Here, this Bulov Cadison performance, down here, says, el buen teatro se comprende, aunque sea representado en idioma desconocido. That is something like good theater is understood even if it's represented in an unknown language. And the desire to attract the audiences who don't speak Yiddish can also be seen in the bilingualism of the poster. You see that the titles and the dates are in Yiddish mainly, but also in Spanish. And I have found a lot of sources that show that the critics and actors of the non-Jewish theater went to see Yiddish plays and were admirers of these Jewish actors. As an example, I want to read you a testimony by the actress Silvia Parodi, a really famous Argentinian actress. I'm going to read it first in Spanish because it's beautiful, and I'm going to then read my English translation. She said, Ben-Ami tiene el don de hacerse comprender sin necesidad del idioma. Sin entender una letra del texto, me basta con contemplar su rostro para sentir reflejarse todas las pasiones y sentimientos. Silencios, actitudes, gestos, dicen tanto que no hay necesidad de más para comprenderle y admirarle. Now in English, Ben-Ami has the gift of making himself understood without the need for language. Even without understanding a letter of the text, it's enough to contemplate his face to feel all the passions and feelings reflected. Silence, attitude, gestures say so much that there is no need for more to understand him and admire him. This is what Silvia Parodi says. And these Jewish actors were also honored by the Sociedad Argentina de Actores, the Argentinian Actors Association, and were received en la Casa del Teatro, in the theater house. Some of them were even invited to direct national companies, as it was the case of Mori Schwartz, who directed in 1942 the musical comedy Esta Noche Filmación, in Spanish, at the Casino Theater, where he directed Tita Merelo. Tita Merelo was a really famous actress at that time. And he also staged a Spanish version of Der Dibuk by Shlomo Ansky. Here you have some of the reviews, theater reviews of the period. This is Silvia Parodi, the one I already read. And this is also like Jewish actor Mori Schwartz, Ben-Ami, Jewish actor of merit. This type of reviews we can find in Argentinian newspapers. And Ben-Ami performed in a film in Argentina. This is really interesting. It was called Esperanza. Here you have the posters. It was in 1949. He started the film in Spanish. He played, he's like a Jewish gaucho, un gaucho judío. And I think it was the only time that he ever appeared in a film in Argentina. Therefore, the Jewish theater was seen by the Argentinian community as a significant phenomenon, especially when these actors brought repertoire that was unknown in the Buenos Aires theater scene. This was the case of Joseph Bulloff's Death of a Salesman, Todd Funa Salesman, which premiered in Buenos Aires in 1949 in Soleil Theater. That's the program. It's in Spanish. I argue that this is an emblematic case that shows how the Yiddish theater operated as a modernizing force that deeply influenced the theater scene of Buenos Aires. The show was such a success among Jewish and non-Jewish audiences that in 1950, the prominent actor Narciso Ibáñez Menta premiered a Spanish version of the play. This is the one, La Muerte de un Viajante, in 1950, 1 year later. So, thanks to the itinerancy of the Jewish theater that enabled, through the use of the Yiddish language, the arrival of radical theatrical ideas, modern aesthetics, and new repertoires that had not yet been translated to Spanish and neither developed in Buenos Aires theater. We can find more examples of this in the independent Jewish theater companies, like the IFT. The IFT was the Idisher Folks Teater. We're going to speak a lot about the IFT later in the presentation, but I wanted to say that the IFT was also considered an innovative company within the Buenos Aires theater scene. The IFT artistic director was David Licht, who was a Polish actor who had been part of the Vilna troupe and also of the PIAT, the Jewish Workers' Theater of Paris. Licht brought to the company a realistic acting style through Stanislavski's theories that were practically unknown in Buenos Aires at the time. The IFT also staged Bertolvre's first play that premiered in Argentina. It was Madre Coraje, Mutter Courage. There you have the program, and this is a picture of the play. It was the first time that the Argentinian audiences saw a Bertolt Brecht play. So it was really important. And this way they introduced authors and theories that a few years later would become central in Buenos Aires theater scene. So these are some examples that show how the Yiddish theater operated as a modernizing force that deeply influenced the Argentinian stage. Thus, we have to distinguish between two tendencies that existed in the Jewish theater of Buenos Aires. One of art theater, based on literary works that addressed serious topics and that attracted the non-Jewish artistic circles. And another one, composed of operettas, melodramas, and vaudevilles, whose sole purpose was to entertain the audience, and that normally didn't appear review in the Argentinian press. As you know, this distinction between serious and light dramas was not a local conception, but rather a replica of an opposition that exists in the Jewish theater since the early 20th century. The Schöntheater versus Kunsttheater. Two opposing terms that establish an extreme distinction between theater forms considered high culture and low culture. You can see it here, Kunst versus Schön. It's Theater Argentina, Schön, Kunst, and it's who's gonna win? Who's gonna win the fight? You can see like Schön is dressed more like a clown and showing her legs, and Kunst is all serious. So it's who's gonna win. In Buenos Aires theater community, Benami, Bulloff, and Schwartz were considered promoters of Kunsttheater. In a context where most of the Yiddish theater in Buenos Aires presented plays considered Schön, the Jewish intellectuals believed that the visits of those actors could be a beneficial influence on the local theater scene. However, at the same time, they were deeply concerned about the strong dependence that the Argentinian Jewish theater had on the arrival of foreign stars. The journalists Samuel Rozhansky from the Yiddish Zeitung and Jacobo Toshansky and Ele Zidnitsky from Die Presse tried persistently to warn the Jewish theater community about the dangers of the star system. In his articles, Botoshansky often accused the impresarios of an unreasonable attachment to the idea that it was always necessary to bring foreign stars to lead the cast, while in Argentina we had enough good actors to make a permanent theater work. He also complained about the repertoires that the stars brought to Buenos Aires, either because they staged plays that had already been performed in previous seasons, or because the topics that the plays addressed had nothing to do with the specific Argentinian Jewish experience. This was, in most cases, it was because the stars brought the repertoire that they already had assembled for New York. So in Botoshansky's words, the plays were tailored to the New York public, and that was like a dwarf had to put on a giant's coat. Fine image, right? Really precise. And in Roshansky's words, while journalism and literature, I'm quoting Roshansky, while journalism and literature live from their own local elements, I cannot say that the Yiddish Theater Buenos Aires can even exist for a few months with the local actors that we have. It always requires the visit of foreign actors. The curious thing is that some local actors outweigh certain stars for their talent, and yet this phenomenon persists. So, the history of our theater is the history of the stars that have performed on Buenos Aires stage. This distinction between a true Argentinian Jewish theater and a Jewish theater in Argentina is a persistent idea in the press during those years. A big part of the theater community considered that it was not enough to have theater perform in Yiddish in Argentina, rather it was necessary to develop an Argentinian Yiddish theater built by local forces. This polemic was so big that there were even trials to decide if the star system was beneficial or if it was an obstacle for local theater to rise. It's interesting to see how the impresario Adolfo Mider responded in one of these trials when he was questioned about this topic. He simply answered, "Don't ask me, ask the audiences if they would come to my theater if I didn't bring stars." So Mider's response reflects the importance that the public gave to names and faces. In this sense, you must remember that the stars settled in Buenos Aires during several months of the season. So part of the pleasure of the visit was the excitement that their arrival provoked. People went to the port to welcome the stars, and every Jewish institution held banquets in their honors and meetings. So this was a type of emotion that local actors could never provide. Here you have a Benami reception, a té de camadería for Benami. It's like get together for coffee with Benami. And here is Benami with some Argentinian intellectuals. Another problem was that since the impresarios wanted to make the most of foreign stars during the stay, they demanded that the play should be renewed every week. Therefore, in his first season in Buenos Aires in 1930, Mori Schwartz stayed 10 weeks and staged 13 plays. And Bulov, in his second season in 1934, stayed 8 weeks and staged 9 plays, so more than one play each week. Crazy. In all the interviews I conducted with actors and actresses from this period, they all remember that every time Mori Schwartz came to Buenos Aires, he would make them rehearse without any breaks, and he could spend weeks working day and night without stop. And think about it, this was not only bad for the artistic quality of the plays, it was especially bad for the local artists, for the local actors and actresses. Because unlike the stars that chose roles that they already knew, the Argentinian actors were compelled to prepare several different roles with extremely short rehearsal time. And the problem, of course, was not only artistic, but also economic. The local actors and actresses lacked economic stability in their work, as they depended on the arrival of the stars to become part of their cast and be able to perform. For this reason, in 1932, they constituted an actors' union, the Actiorenverein, in Spanish, La Sociedad de Actores Israelitas en Argentina. Here we have, this is the Verein, and that's the statute of the Verein. That is in the IBO Buenos Aires. These materials, this is from New York Public Library, but that is from IBO Buenos Aires, the Actiorenverein collection. In the Verein statute, there were established a number of rules that impresarios had to stand by. These rules were intended to improve the working conditions of the theater employees. A minimum salary was established, and also a minimum number of members that each cast should have, set at 12 members. Also, it established that the local actors' contracts should last at least 6 months, while the foreign stars' contracts could not last more than 3 months. And the companies cannot hire more than 3 figures from abroad. So these rules sought to counteract the guest stars' monopoly of the stage and provide better working opportunities to local actors and actresses. The success of the Verein regulations created more stability in the profession, plus the advance of anti-Semitism in Europe and later the war, caused that many of the artists that used to come to Buenos Aires as guest stars decided to establish permanently in Argentina during the mid-30s. This was the case of singers and actors such as Max Perelman, Gita Galina, Salomon and Clara Stramer, Israel and Anna Feldbaum, among others. Many of these actors became impresarios as well. In 1945, the Soleil Theater, until then managed by the American lawyer Charles Groll, who was Jenny Goldstein's husband, became the Empresa Soleil, formed by the actors Salomon Stramer, Mauricio Peltz, Israel Feldbaum, and Leon Naredkin. An interesting fact is that Groll tried to establish a Yiddish art theater branch in Buenos Aires. He proposed to Maurice Schwartz to partially settle in Argentina during 6 months, and apparently he said yes. The project was even advertised in the Argentinian press and by Maurice Schwartz itself, but it never ended up happening. So Groll passed the administration of the Soleil to the hands of this group of local actors. The Soleil tried to position itself as a theater of good artistic level and higher quality than its competitors, such as El Teatro Mitre, in which melodramas and operettas prevail, but like the rest of the commercial Yiddish theaters, the Soleil continued to depend on the visits of foreign stars to sustain the theater season. So, if we want to find a theater company that was not built around the star system, we must look at the case of Teatro Ift, the Idisher Folks Teater, the Jewish People's Theater. As many art theater Jewish companies that emerged from amateur theater groups, the campaign for a Kunsttheater in Buenos Aires was carried out by members and intellectuals gathered around the Ibrams, the Idische Dramatische Studie, the Jewish Dramatic Study, an amateur group created in 1932. As a matter of fact, the Ift and the Vilna troupe story, foundation story, is the same. I recently have read in Debra Kaplan's book that Fada was founded in one of its members' kitchen, while Ibrams was created in Sarita Solnik's kitchen. That's the famous story, it's the same. And it was created by members of Jewish workers' clubs who wanted to make plays that could respond to the needs of the Jewish popular masses. Later, Ibrams became a permanent Jewish theater and in 1937 changed its name to Ift. The Ift members' goal was to build a theater company formed by local actors and actresses that would have a strong aesthetics and political commitment. They agreed with the theater critics in their negative diagnosis of the situation of the Jewish theater in Argentina due to the absence of a Kunsttheater. They believed that in order to sustain an art theater, it was essential: 1, to be free of the star system, creating instead an ensemble style; 2, to stage new and original literary plays; 3, to have professional directors who could bring modern aesthetic conceptions to Jewish stage. And 4, to build a solid base of associates that will collaborate with the economic support of the theater. In other words, they were trying to build a new type of Yiddish theater with a different concept opposite to commercial Yiddish theater. Here you have the first logo of Ibrams, where you can see this desire to transform the theater, right? It's a worker with the hammer, Giselin, I don't know the exact word, thank you, an ancient theater mask. This is the cover of Night Theater, which was the magazine that they published in 1935. This is 1945, number 2. And these are some of the plays of Ibrams. This is Bei Nacht auf dem Alten Mar by A.L. Perez, and this is Despertar, a play by a Soviet dramatist. So in 1936, they created a committee pro Teatro Popular Israelita in Argentina for a people's Yiddish theater in Buenos Aires to gather the funds to become a permanent theater. The campaign that the committee carried out was mainly a campaign to get associates, where they appealed to anyone who considered himself a supporter of Kunsttheater. In their publications, they addressed to the friends of the art theater or to the lovers of a better theater, calling on the Jewish population to associate and fulfill a great duty towards Jewish art and culture. I'm quoting. Here you have, these are some of the ways they try to raise the money. And this campaign was really successful. They wanted to build the idea that supporting the IFT was to collaborate with the only theater that could raise the level of Jewish culture in Buenos Aires. And we should look at the numbers to see how successful it was. In 1936, the goal was to achieve 500 associates, and by 1957, the institution had more than 5,000 subscribers. This is the card for the associate. This Asociación Israelita Argentina Pro Arte IFT Socio Vitalicio. So this membership system implied a monthly contribution from the associates, which allowed the theater not to depend on ticket sales to maintain themselves financially. The IFT members believe in the independence from the box office as one of their fundamental and non-negotiable principles. They considered that being independent of ticket sales was the only way to be able to take artistic risk and bring new aesthetics and authors to the stage. So by developing a membership system, they created the figure of the Iftler. An Iftler was a person who supported the institution and that through that support became part of the institution. So to establish a membership system reinforced the idea that the construction and sustaining of a permanent Jewish theater in Buenos Aires had to be a common goal of all the Argentinian Jewish community. A good example of the importance that the Jewish population of Buenos Aires gave to the theater was the campaign for the construction of a playhouse for the IFT, La Campaña Pro Edificio Propio, or campaign Paranegan Albinium. You have that started in 1946. By the mid-40s, they realized that they need to have their own space and stop renting other playhouses. So they started a financial campaign to gather the funds for it, and in 1947, the construction project began. And by 1952, the building was already finished, and the IFT became the first and only Jewish company in Buenos Aires to have his own theater. These documents show us how the rhetoric strategies were to appeal to their associates. Here is also Night Theater, it's the cover of the number 18, and we can see this is the logo of the IFT. And we can see it's like the IFT gathering the bricks that these anonymous hands are given to him, right? Is the folk eager to collaborate to make the dream of their own theater come true. And there you have also the bricks. The leitmotif of the bricks is like the way that they used to appeal to the associates in the campaign. You can see that these are all bricks, small bricks. And in this one, this is my favorite one. I think it's the best document that I have found. It's a bonus. It was called Bono Ladrillo, brick bonus, and it's 5 pesos. And it says that with 5 pesos, I contribute with 50 bricks. So if you pay 5 pesos, you were contributing, buying 50 bricks for the construction of the theater. And that was the slogan of the campaign, that is the essence of a folk's culture is measured by its creative artistic forces. La esencia de la cultura de un pueblo se mide en sus fuerzas artísticas creadoras. That was the slogan of the campaign. So, this was really effective. I've interviewed a lot of people, like all the people I interview wanted to tell me with how many bricks their parents contribute to the building, to the Yiddish Theater. It was a really important thing for them to contribute. So in 1946, they bought the land. Here is the celebration that they bought the land to build the theater. And in 1946 too, they placed the fundamental stone. It's a picture over there. And in 1952, the theater was already open. This is the ceremony of the inauguration of the theater. So this way they became the first Jewish company to have its own theater. Once the building was open and they had extra room and more stability, they started to establish new activities in order to satisfy the cultural needs of the community in a wider sense. They organized music concerts and conferences every week, and over the years they add a dramatic school, a choir, a library, a cinema club, a ballet and a theater school for children, a puppetry collective, an art gallery, and even a chess club. This way, they became more than a theater. The IFT became a cultural center. So the IFT was the first Jewish theater company formed by local actors and actresses that perform in Buenos Aires on a regular basis and that defined itself as an Argentinian Jewish theater. Even though it was originally founded by Jewish immigrants and that many of its members and directors came from Europe, over the years the theater became so firmly established in Buenos Aires that it began performing in Spanish, and finally replaced Yiddish as its formal language in 1957. The first play that they presented in Spanish was here you have, I didn't show you this one. This is the IFT from outside, the entrance, and this is the choir, Coro Ayel Pérez, here. And here you have El Diario de Ana Frank, the Diary of Anne Frank. That was the first play that they presented in Spanish. And it was a huge success. The play ran for 3 years. And since then, until 1966, when the permanent cast was dissolved, most of the IFT plays were performed in Spanish. Here you have one of David Licht's plays, Boitre. It was in 1938. So when the audiences started decreasing, the IFT decided to replace Yiddish with Spanish. I believe, and please tell me if I'm mistaken, that to have a Yiddish theater that started performing in a non-Jewish language, but kept defining itself as a Jewish theater, it's unprecedented, or at least unusual, in Jewish theater history. The IFT members made this sort of experiment that lasted for 10 years, where they tried to still be a Yiddish theater without the Yiddish. They truly believe that the Jewish identity of the theater will remain even if they perform in a non-Jewish language. There are many reasons that could explain why they decided to replace Yiddish with Spanish. First of all, we need to remember that meanwhile the IFT developed as a true independent theater, it was independent from the impresarios, from the box office, and from the star system, it was not independent of the Communist Party. Most of the members of the IFT were affiliated to the PCA, the Argentinian Communist Party, el Partido Comunista Argentino, and were also the leaders of the Argentinian branch of the ICUF, the Idisher Kulturverband, the Jewish Culture Association, which unified all left-wing Jewish institutions in Argentina. The Progressive, they called themselves progressive. It was an Argentinian euphemism to say Jewish communists. Many scholars that have studied the history of the ICUF, as Nerina Vysakovsky, Israel Lotterstein, Ariel Svarch, argue that in the late 50s, the ICUF started a campaign to replace Yiddish with Spanish in all its institutions. Some claim that they were following the guidelines of the Soviet Union or the Argentinian Communist Party, others to acriollarse, to acculturate. Los ICUFistas were accused by the Communist Party of staying in a Jewish ghetto which prevented them from reaching the working class. They believed that the attachment to the Yiddish language stood in the way of integration with the rest of Argentinian society. And these ideas agree with the left-wing ideology of the ICUF members, as they considered that the problems of humanity were universal, in opposition to the Zionist movement concerned exclusively with the Jewish question. Los ICUFistas believed that the progressive legacy was universal, so it had to be transmitted in the language in which most people could understand it. On the other hand, the use of Yiddish in the IFT stage was also becoming a disconnection factor for young people whose mother tongue was already Spanish. So the need to extend their ideological influence to the new generations forced them to abandon a language that the younger audience no longer use. I'm going to read you a quote from an article published in 1957 in Yiddish Theater, so you can see how the IFT member justified switching to Spanish. I'm going to read it in English directly. They say, the Yiddish Theater cannot close its eyes to the changes that have taken place in the Jewish community after so many decades of acculturation on Argentinian soil, nor to remain isolated from national culture. Therefore, while continue to cultivate the highest and most universal manifestations of Yiddish culture, its entrenchment in Argentinian life and the needs of the new generations who no longer speaks the mother tongue have made imperative the use of the common language of all Argentinian people in the IFT stage. In addition, not only was the Yiddish audience decreasing, but there were fewer and fewer young actors and actresses who could or wanted to perform in Yiddish. The younger actors were already integrated into Argentinian society and wanted to make plays that could reach a wider audience. Also, to perform in Spanish allowed them to become a significant part of the independent theater movement that in the 60s was already in its golden age, el movimiento de teatros independientes. In 1955, the IFT became part of the FATI, la Federación Argentina de Teatros Independientes, the Argentinian Federation of Independent Theaters. So, like the Communist Party pushed the ICUF to replace Yiddish with Spanish, the FATI pushed the IFT to become a Spanish-speaker theater so that it could contribute better to the federation goals. The members of the IFT believed that it was possible to preserve their Jewish cultural identity even in a non-Jewish language, because as the Jewish dramatist Osvaldo Dragún said, there is no specific language to fight for a culture. Youth can do a lot for Jewish culture in the language they feel most comfortable with. This is a quote from Osvaldo Dragún. However, to replace Yiddish with Spanish was not an easy decision for the IFT members. It was a painful decision. They still talk to me about this with eyes full of tears. But the IFT was a people's theater. They truly believe in Peret's quote, which was written in one of the IFT walls, Theater a Schule für Erwachsene, the theater as a school for adults. So performing in Spanish was the only way they found to remain faithful to their original mission, to educate the people and to build a better world through culture. When the Jewish masses spoke in Yiddish, the purpose of the IFT was to put them in contact with a better and meaningful theater performing their own language. But in the 60s, it was the opposite. It was to transmit Jewish culture and political values in the language of all Argentinians. As Luis Goldman explained in Tribune was the ICUF newspaper, he says, to attract the young audiences, the faithful older members must understand the new generations and accept their idiomatic difference, their different way of being. Let Mendele, Sholem Aleichem, and Peretz speak in Spanish if Yiddish is no longer understood. Let them speak in any language, since that is the fundamental need for the construction of socialism. This way, from 1957 until 1966, the IFT performed most of its plays in Spanish. Here you have some of the plays, bring it to the Argentinian audiences, plays by Chekhov, Arthur Miller, Sholem Aleichem, and also Argentinian Jewish dramatists who wrote in Spanish as Germán Rosenmacher. That's a really famous Argentinian play. It's called Requiem para un viernes a la noche. During those years, the IFT became a theater of great relevance in the national scene, as well as a place of reference for the left-wing Jewish and non-Jewish youth. Nevertheless, when the IFT abandoned Yiddish, it began to lose its position on the Jewish community. During the 60s, the loss of associates was an irreversible process. As a theater whose form of financing had never come from ticket sales, when the IFT associates started decreasing, the institution suffered a financial crisis it could never solve. So in 1966, tired of waiting for professionalization, most of the members of the cast left to pursue their professional careers elsewhere. So this was the end of the permanent theater company of the IFT. And what happened with the rest of the Yiddish theaters? The decision to establish Hebrew over Yiddish as Israel's official language has been usually seen as a turning point for Yiddish theater in Argentina. Because after the State of Israel was founded, Hebrew began to replace Yiddish as a second language in Jewish schools, making that less and less young people could understand the plays. However, it was not only the language barrier that caused the loss of young people among Yiddish theater audiences. The interviews that I conducted show me that in the 50s, the younger Jews still understood Yiddish without any difficulty. So they could have attended to theater if they had wanted to. But what they had lost was not the language, but the Heimischkeit, the feeling to be at home at the theater. The new generation had been born in Argentina and their mother tongue was Spanish. The Yiddish theater was the theater of their parents and grandparents, with its actors and outdated stories that they no longer felt related to. As it was written in a literature Jewish magazine called Patch, el público judío solo va al teatro Yiddish para acompañar a los suegros. The Jewish public only goes to the Yiddish theater to accompany the in-laws. This was exactly what my grandma used to tell me about Yiddish theater. And also they wrote, this is horrible, they wrote this quote is, every Jew who passes away leaves an empty seat in the Soleil theater. Por cada espectador judío que fallece queda una butaca vacía en el Soleil. So the theater season became shorter and the Yiddish theater started closing, first the Excelsior, then the Soleil, and at last the Mitre in 1972. But to end on a happier note, although the IFT company no longer exists, the institution still stands. If you travel to Buenos Aires, you can go to Once and visit the IFT theater. And luckily, in recent years, the ICUF have been doing efforts to rescue the IFT history and saving its materials. Recently, they created an ICUF archive called Centro de Documentación y Biblioteca Piñecats, CEDOB Piñecats. You can look for it on Facebook. And I had the pleasure of working in the IFT archives, organizing and cataloging the theater historical materials. They also have been trying to make the IFT work again. So if you go to Buenos Aires during the theater season, You can even go to the IF to see a play. And it won't be a Yiddish play, but at least it will be a play performed in a theater that the Jewish community of Buenos Aires built with much effort, sacrifice, and love. So thank you very much for listening and playing down.